So I'm Colleen, R.J. Clement, and I'm a Seattleite now, but originally from Tri-Cities. I grew up in Kennewick and was born in Richland, and I'm an artist, primarily working in fiber and installation work. My grandfather originally moved to Hanford and Richland area in the first wave of all of the DuPont workers. So he was working in Delaware for DuPont, and a bunch of his friends heard the call that they needed war construction workers and that it offered really good pay. And so he and his friends drove across country all the way to the Hanford site and got hired on there. And he is an engineer, or was an engineer, so he got hired on doing that kind of work. And met my grandma on a weekend trip to Mount Rainier, and she was a student over at UW, and they just kind of hit it off and dated long distance, and then they got married, and she moved to Richland with him, and that was after the bomb was dropped. So he had already been working in Hanford for a while before then. And then they had 5 kids, one of which was my dad. Excuse me. They must have moved to Richland before 1947 because my dad was born in 1947 in Richland. My dad said that they moved into the Q House in Richland in 1947. Grew up in Richland, went to Richland High School and was a bomber. And then he went to Central Washington University to study geology. Took a photography class because he heard it was going to be an easy A. Yeah. And then discovered his passion was landscape photography. So in 1975, my father got hired on Battelle at Hanford because he failed his physical for the draft. So after college, I think a few months after he graduated, he got called to do his physical, and him and his 3 brothers got drafted. And my Uncle Tom and my dad both failed their draft physical because they had some strange hearing loss, and my Uncle Paul passed it, and so he was drafted. So yeah, because of that, my dad had to go find some sort of job, and instead decided to pursue his landscape photographer interest, and was hired on by Battelle for Hanford to take record pictures of the site and of the surrounding area. So pretty interesting. And through that job, he got another job traveling up the East Coast, and that's where he met my mom in Virginia, and they got married and moved back to Richland again. Yeah, and so I was born in 1989, so my parents were 42 or something. They were pretty old, or older by then. And currently my sister-in-law works at Hanford. She works balancing kind of the radioactive machines, or calibrating the machines that level radioactive levels. And then my brother just got hired on a few months ago as an electrician for the vitrification plant. So it's interesting because my grandfather was there at the very beginning, working on the extracting plutonium. My father was there kind of documenting everything after it had happened, the bomb. And then now my brother is working on trying to somehow solve the problem now. My dad hasn't talked a whole lot about it, just because he worked there for such a short period, just taking photographs for them. He never really worked, working on any of the plants. He was more like a freelance hired by them. My grandfather, I didn't know very well. I was 11 when he died from cancer, from working at Hanford. But I know that he did a lot of interviews talking about his time at Hanford, of which I still am trying to find, because these were done in the 80s. But he was active in like talking about his role in Hanford. He actually worked with, he played tennis with Enrico Fermi, which is crazy. My grandmother lives right across the street from, I can't remember what school it's called. I think it's John Day or St. John's or something. But they have tennis courts on the campus, and I would go play tennis with my grandpa out there when I was little. And so, like I said, I didn't know him very well, but like that's one of the things I always think of is tennis. And then my mom told me about that a few years ago, and that's crazy that they played tennis together. And he also worked on, when the B reactor closed, trying to get like a museum or something like that to kind of have that history. And he was a volunteer with the Crest Museum over in Tri-Cities, trying to work with them and get a lot of information. So it's awesome because he was playing an active role in getting the information out and getting the history contained. So yeah. I always knew that there was like a plant. You know, I didn't really know the whole history. When I was younger, since my dad was a landscape photographer, we would go out on drives all the time and go to the Hanford Reach and take photographs, and actually take photographs of, you could see the plume, you know, like, I mean, not the plume, that sounds awful, but you could see the plants and like all of the steam rising from different places. And it was just kind of like a thing off in the distance. And I think around the time my grandfather died, it was like, oh, what's cancer? And because I was 11, so a lot of new things come into your mind when you start to reach puberty. And my parents explaining why all of a sudden my grandmother came into all of this money, because since my grandfather died from cancer, the government gives them a huge settlement check. So that was kind of the explanation and the introduction into, okay, this is Hanford, and this horrible thing came out of it. It's really dark, and also just strange that there's all these like atomic themes around the Tri-Cities, and it is such a strange place now that I've lived somewhere else and go back and see the culture. It's kind of almost stuck in the 1950s. Yeah, it's just got like a weird culture there. And then not until I went to college and did even more and more research did I learn how crazy it was. And I always heard about, you know, the possibility of leaks and things like that, but it just never really set in until I educated myself more in college.